Okay, so imagine this for a second. You're standing on the coast of Uruguay. It's a beautiful day. You've got the beaches at Punta del Este. The hotels are gleaming in the sun. You know, tourists everywhere.
Right. A perfect South American paradise.
Exactly. But then you look out at the water, and there's a crane, and it's pulling something up from the bottom of the sea. And it's not like a chest of gold doubloons or an old anchor.
No. It is a massive 400-kilogram bronze eagle. And it's not just any eagle. It's clutching a swastika in its talons. That actually happened in 2006.
It's such a jarring image. I mean, you just don't associate the coast of Uruguay with the Third Reich. But that bronze bird is basically the tombstone for one of the most fascinating and, frankly, weirdest episodes of World War II.
It really is. That eagle belonged to the Admiral Graf Spee, and its recovery is this very heavy, very physical reminder that the war wasn't just fought in Europe or the Pacific. For a brief, really intense window in 1939, the South Atlantic was the stage for a massive clash.
And that's what we're unpacking today, the Battle of the River Plate. This story has everything. We've got a ship that was basically engineered to be a cheat code, a captain who refused to act like a Nazi, a high-stakes poker game played by diplomats, and a modern-day ethical crisis about that giant bronze bird.
And it's worth noting right up front, this was the first major naval battle between the British and the Germans in World War II, and it was the only military episode of the entire war to take place in South America.
So no D-Day beaches, no jungle warfare. We are in the estuary between Uruguay and Argentina. But okay, before the shooting starts, we have to talk about the villain of the story, at least the antagonist, the Admiral Graf Spee. In the history books, it's always called a pocket battleship. That sounds kind of cute, but I'm guessing it wasn't.
Not cute at all, no. That nickname, pocket battleship, was actually a bit of a backhanded compliment from the British press. To understand this ship, you have to go all the way back to the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. The world powers were, terrified of Germany building another massive fleet, so they put these really strict limits on them. Germany wasn't allowed to build warships heavier than 10,000 tons.
Right. The whole idea was to keep them in the coastal defense weight class.
Yeah, no.
No heavyweights.
Exactly. But German engineering in the 1930s was, let's say, creative. They decided to cheat. So they officially listed the Graf Spee at 10,000 tons, just to keep the treaty inspectors happy. But in reality,
Was it really?
the ship displaced 16,200 tons.
Whoa, that is a massive difference. It's like signing up for a lightweight boxing match and showing up weighing 200 pounds because you filled your gloves with lead. How do they hide 6,000 tons of extra warship?
Well, they didn't just hide it. They kind of revolutionized naval architecture to make it work. They used electric welding instead of rivets. Now, I know that sounds like a super boring industrial detail, but rivets are heavy. By welding the hull, they saved a huge amount of weight.
And all that saved weight.
Went directly into weaponry and armor.
So they stripped the fat and just added muscle.
A lot of muscle. They added 6 enormous 283-millimeter guns. That's 11 inches.
11 inches.
To put that in perspective, a standard heavy cruiser of that era had maybe 8-inch guns. The Graf Spee could outgun almost anything afloat.
And it was fast, too, right? I remember reading about the design philosophy behind this whole class of ship.
Yes, the doctrine was simple and, well, terrifying. Faster than any ship, stronger than it, and stronger than any ship, faster than it. So if a huge British battleship, which was stronger, came along, the Graf Spee could just run away.
And if a faster ship came along?
If a faster cruiser came along, the Graf Spee could just blow it out of the water with those 11-inch guns. It was designed to be, uncatchable and unkillable.
So you build this quote-unquote invincible ship. It's 1939, war breaks out. What do you do with it? You don't just keep it at home.
No, you send it to strangle Great Britain. The mission was called Corsair Warfare. Think of it as state-sponsored piracy on an industrial scale. The Graf Spee was sent to the South Atlantic to hunt merchant ships.
Why the South Atlantic specifically?
Food. The southern cone of South America, we're talking Argentina and Uruguay, was a massive supplier of beef and grain to the UK. The goal wasn't to fight the British Navy, it was to starve the British people. If the Graf Spee could disrupt those supply lines, Britain would have to disperse its entire fleet just to hunt this one ship down.
And looking at the sources, the man commanding this ship, Captain Hans Langsdorff, he's a fascinating contradiction. You expect a Nazi commander to be ruthless, maybe fanatical, but Langsdorff seems like a gentleman.
He was an old-school naval officer. He really viewed war as a contest between ships, not some slaughter of men. His record is, honestly, it's mind-blowing. Between September and December 1939, the Graf Spee sank 9 merchant vessels. That's about 50,000 tons of shipping.
Okay, so he's effective. He's doing his job.
He is. But here's the stat that just stops you in your tracks. In sinking those 9 ships, Hans Langsdorff did not kill a single person. Not one sailor, not one cook, not one captain.
Wait, hold on. He sank 50,000 tons of shipping without a single casualty in 1939. That sounds less like warfare and more like aggressive negotiations. How is that even possible?
It takes immense patience and discipline. He'd intercept a merchant ship, fire a warning shot, and order them to stop. Then he'd send a boarding party. He would bring the entire enemy crew aboard the Graf Spee or transfer them to his supply ship.
The whole crew.
The whole crew. He made sure they had their personal effects, made sure they were fed. Only when the target ship was completely empty would he sink it.
He was following the old prize rules of the sea.
Strictly. I mean, he even bought tobacco for the prisoners. He treated them as guests, and it drove the British Admiralty insane because not only was he destroying their logistics, he was doing it with such style that they couldn't even use it for propaganda.
Right. You can't call him a Hunnish monster.
Exactly. They couldn't.
But the British Navy isn't going to let a pirate, gentleman or not, run wild forever. So this is where Commodore Henry Harwood enters the picture. He's the hunter.
Harwood was the commander of the British South American Squadron, and he was a very cerebral commander. He knew he couldn't just chase the Graf Spee all over the ocean is just too big. He had to guess where Langsdorff would go.
And he guessed the River Plate.
It was a calculated risk. The River Plate estuary is a total bottleneck for all that trade we talked about. So Harwood figured Langsdorff would eventually get greedy and come for the main shipping lane. So Harwood took his squadron, the heavy cruiser HMS Exeter and 2 light cruisers, HMS Ajax and the HMNZS Achilles, and he just waited.
And it's worth noting, the Achilles was a New Zealand ship. Good reminder of how global this conflict really was. So, December 13th, 1939. Smoke on the horizon. The trap is sprung. But this is where the math gets tricky, right? The Graf Spee has 11-inch guns. The British have 8-inch and 6-inch guns. On paper, the Graf Spee should just sit back at maximum range and pick them off.
That would have been the logical thing to do. But Langsdorff made a fatal assumption. When he saw the masts on the horizon, he didn't launch his reconnaissance plane because its engine block was cracked, so he was flying blind. He assumed these were just a couple of destroyers protecting a merchant convoy.
So he thinks, lunchtime.
Exactly. He ordered full speed ahead to close the range. He wanted to crush them quickly. By the time he realized he was facing 3 actual cruisers that were fast and well commanded, he was already committed. He'd walked into a knife fight when he should have been sniping.
And this is where we need to get a bit technical. You mentioned earlier that the Graf Spee had a design flaw. Something about its fire control system.
Right. To save weight, the Germans only installed one primary fire control system. You can think of this system as a sort of a primitive mechanical analog computer. It takes in all this data, wind speed, target course, your own speed, the range, and it calculates exactly where to aim the big guns.
So it does all the trigonometry for you.
Yes.
Yes.
But because there was only one system, it could only produce one firing solution at a time. It could tell the 11-inch guns how to hit one target.
Ah, I see where this is going. Harwood has 3 ships.
And Harwood knew about this German weakness. He immediately split his force. He sent the big Exeter to the south and the 2 smaller light cruisers to the north. They attacked from completely different angles.
So Langsdorff is stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
If he aims his director at the Exeter, the little ships are free to rush in and hammer him. If he looks at the little ships, the Exeter hits him with the heavy stuff.
Precisely. It overloaded the computer. The Graf Spee was trying to switch targets rapidly, but that just meant its accuracy suffered. And meanwhile, the British ships were just biting like terriers.
But the Graf Spee is still a beast. The Exeter took a serious beating, didn't it?
Oh, it was horrific. The Exeter was hit by 7 11-inch shells. The bridge was destroyed. Most of the guns were knocked out. Fires were raging. It was practically sinking. But it kept drawing fire long enough for the light cruisers to get close.
And in that chaos, the British land. A hit that changes everything. It wasn't a magazine explosion or the engine room. It was the kitchen.
Close. It was the fuel purification plant. Sounds incredibly boring, I know, but it was the absolute Achilles heel of the ship.
Explain that to me. Why does a battleship need a purification plant? Can't you just pump fuel into the engine?
Not with the diesel engines the Graf Spee used. They ran on crude oil to save money and extend range. But crude oil is thick, it's dirty sludge. Before you can inject it into a precision diesel engine, you have to heat it and spin it in a centrifuge to separate out all the water and the grit.
So it's like trying to run a Ferrari on sludge unless you refine it first.
Exactly. And a 6-inch shell from one of the British cruisers smashed right through that processing plant. So suddenly, the Graf Spee has plenty of fuel in its tanks, but it's all useless, raw crude. They couldn't clean it. They calculated they had about 16 hours of clean fuel left.
That is a nightmare. Your ship is still floating, the guns are still working, but your kidneys just failed. You can't process fluids. 16 hours isn't enough to get back to Germany.
It's barely enough to get anywhere. Langsdorff did the math. He couldn't fight a prolonged battle, and he certainly couldn't cross the Atlantic. He had to find a neutral port for repairs, so he turned the ship west toward Montevideo.
And this is where the whole story just shifts genres. We go from a high-octane naval thriller to like a tense legal drama. The Graf Spee limps into Montevideo harbor. The whole city comes down to the docks to stare. But Uruguay is neutral. Langsdorff can't just set up shop.
No, and this brings us to international law, specifically the Hague Convention of 1907. Articles 12 and 14 are very clear. A belligerent warship can only stay in a neutral port for 24 hours.
Not a lot of time.
But there is an exception. If the ship is unseaworthy, it can stay longer to make repairs essential for safety, but not to repair battle damage that increases its combat power.
That sounds like a very blurry line. Safety versus combat power. Langsdorff argues he needs 2 weeks.
He asks for 14 days. He claims the hull damage makes the ship unsafe. But the British minister in Montevideo, a guy named Eugen Millington Drake, is a master tactician. He puts immense pressure on the Uruguayan government. He argues, look, the ship sailed here just fine. It's seaworthy. Kick them out.
And the Uruguayans are just stuck in the middle. They eventually compromise and give Langsdorff 72 hours, 3 days.
3 days is not enough, not nearly enough to rebuild a fuel plant. But then the British realize something. If the Graf Spee sails in 72 hours, it might still be able to destroy their battered squadron waiting just outside. The real British reinforcements, the big aircraft carriers and battleships, are still thousands of miles away.
So the British suddenly need to keep Langsdorff in the port, but they just spent all day arguing to kick him out.
And this is where Millington Drake pulls a move that is pure genius. He invokes Article 16 of the Hague Convention. This obscure rule says that a warship cannot leave a neutral port less than 24 hours after a merchant ship of the opposing nation has left.
Oh, that is devious. So if a British cargo ship leaves Montevideo at noon, the Graf Spee is legally blocked from leaving until noon the next day.
Correct. So the British arranged for their merchant ships to leave the harbor at these perfectly calculated intervals. A ship leaves, the 24-hour clock resets, another ship leaves, clock resets again. They were using international law to legally chain the Graf Spee to the dock.
That buys them time. But it doesn't solve the bigger problem that the Graf Spee can still outgun the ships waiting outside.
Yeah.
They needed Langsdorff to believe he was outnumbered.
The bluff. This is right out of a spy novel. British intelligence knew that German spies in Montevideo were tapping their phone lines.
Okay.
So they just started feeding false information over those lines. They had agents call each other and say things like, oh, thank God the Ark Royal and the Renown are arriving tonight to refuel.
Just name dropping the heavy hitters.
The heaviest hitters. The Ark Royal is an aircraft carrier. The Renown is a battle cruiser. In reality, they were 1,000 miles away. But Langsdorff gets these transcripts. He looks out of the harbor and sees smoke on the horizon, which was just the British cruisers making smoke to look busy. And he puts 2 and 2 together.
He thinks the entire Royal Navy is waiting for him just over the horizon.
He is convinced he's hopelessly outnumbered. He's got low ammo, 16 hours of fuel, and he thinks he's about to face an aircraft carrier. It's a no-win situation.
So it's Sunday, December 17th. The 72-hour deadline is up. The whole world is watching. I mean, 300,000 people are lining the coast. They're selling hot dogs, renting binoculars. They're expecting a gladiator match.
Langsdorff sends a telegram to Berlin. He outlines the situation, and Hitler is furious. The order comes back, fight to the last shell. Basically, go out there and die for the fatherland.
But Langsdorff has that code we talked about earlier.
He does. He gathers his officers, and he tells them he's not willing to let his crew be shot pieces in a hopeless battle just for propaganda. He famously said, I prefer 1,000 live heroes to 1,000 dead heroes.
So the ship starts to move.
The Graf Spee weighs anchor. It sails out of the harbor just to the edge of the 3-mile territorial limit. The sun is setting, the huge crowd goes silent, the British ships outside clear their decks for action, thinking, okay, here we go.
And
The Graf Spee stops. A few small boats are seen leaving its side. That's the skeleton crew evacuating. And then a series of massive explosions just rip through the hull.
He scuttled it.
He blew the bottom out of his own ship. The Graf Spee shuddered, settled into the shallow mud of the estuary. It didn't sink completely. The water wasn't deep enough, so it just sat there burning. A twisted pile of metal.
It's an anticlimax for the crowd, but a massive relief for the British. But the story has one final tragic chapter for the captain.
Langsdorff and his crew were taken to Buenos Aires in Argentina. The crew was interned, Langsdorff was safe, but he was a broken man. He felt he'd failed his country, even though he had saved his men.
The pressure must have been unimaginable. The public was calling him a coward. The Naval High Command in Berlin was calling him a traitor.
2 days later, on December 19th, in a hotel room in Buenos Aires, he wrote letters to his family and his commanders, taking full responsibility. And then, and this detail is so important, he spread out the flag of the Imperial German Navy, not the Nazi swastika flag, the old flag of World War I. He lay down on it and shot himself.
That choice of flag, that feels like a final statement. I am a German officer, not a Nazi puppet.
It absolutely was. Even in death, he was distancing himself from the regime. And it's so telling that when he was buried, British merchant captains, the men whose ships he had sunk, attended the funeral. They came to pay their respects to the man who spared their lives.
That is powerful. So the captain is gone. The ship is a wreck in the mud. What happens to the 1,000 sailors left in Argentina?
This is the part of the story that nobody ever talks about. They didn't just vanish. A few officers escaped back to Germany, but most of the crew just, well, they stayed. They integrated.
They became immigrants.
Exactly. There's this wonderful detail from the research about a house in Rosario, Argentina. This one house became a commune for 17 survivors from the Graf Spee. They lived there. They got jobs in local factories. 3 of them married local Argentine women. They had kids.
So there are people walking around Argentina today who are the grandchildren of the Graf Spee's gunners.
Hundreds of them. The Battle of the River Plate isn't just a chapter in a history book for them. It's their family origin story.
Meanwhile, back in the river, the British weren't quite done with the Graf Spee. The ship was dead, but its secrets weren't.
Not at all. Remember, the water was shallow. The ship wasn't fully submerged. Almost immediately, British intelligence sent divers disguised as locals to board the wreck.
What were they looking for?
Radar. The Graf Spee had a Sea-tact radar system, which was actually more advanced than what the British had at that moment. The divers managed to climb the mast, inspect the antenna, and that intelligence allowed British scientists to develop countermeasures that were crucial for the rest of the war. So even in death, the Graf Spee ended up helping the Allies.
Which brings us full circle.
Yeah.
Right back to that Bronze Eagle we started with. The ship sits there for decades, sinking into the mud. Then in 2006, entrepreneurs salvaged the stern Eagle.
And suddenly, Uruguay has a problem. They have this magnificent, historically significant object that is also a giant symbol of hate.
It's the ultimate ethical dilemma. Museums didn't want to display it without a ton of context. Private collectors wanted it, but selling it runs the risk of it ending up in some neo-Nazi shrine.
So it sat in a warehouse for years.
Yeah.
Then in 2023, the president of Uruguay, Luis Lacalle, announced a solution. He proposed melting the eagle down.
Destroying it.
Worse, transforming it. He wanted to hire a sculptor to melt the bronze and recast it into a dove of peace.
Wow. Literally beating swords into plowshares. Or eagles into doves. On the surface, that sounds poetic. Why did people hate the idea?
Because it's erasing history. Historians, Jewish groups, preservationists, they all immediately pushed back. They argued that you can't sanitize the past. The eagle is ugly. It represents a terrible regime, but it is real. If you melt it down, you're pretending it didn't exist. You're destroying evidence.
It's the difference between remembering history and trying to honor it. Keeping the eagle remembers it. Melting it down is trying to fix it.
Exactly. The backlash was so severe that the president canceled the plan just a few days later. So as of now, the eagle is still in limbo. It's a 400-kilogram ghost that nobody knows how to lay to rest.
It is wild that a naval battle from 1939 is still generating headlines and ethical debates almost a century later.
It just speaks to the uniqueness of this story. The Battle of the River Plate wasn't the biggest battle of the war. It wasn't the bloodiest, but it had these layers of humanity and law and technology that just make it stick.
And as a turning point, it proved the German war machine could actually be beaten.
It was a massive morale boost for Britain during a very dark winter. It showed that smart tactics, Harwood's pincer movement, the diplomat's bluff, could defeat superior engineering.
So what's the final takeaway here? When we think of the Graf Spee, What should we see?
I think we should see the irony. You have this ship built to be a perfect, invincible killing machine. It was commanded by a man who refused to kill. And in the end, that ship wasn't destroyed by the enemy's guns. It was destroyed by its own captain to save the lives of his crew.
A suicide to save 1,000 lives.
And that legacy lives on. The families in Argentina and the radar tech that helped win the war, and in that bronze eagle waiting in the dark. It's a war story, an immigrant story, and a ghost story all wrapped in one.
A lot to think about the next time you look out at the ocean. Thank you for walking us through this.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.